Welcome to the Cyber Call, the podcast by Ride of Boom for managed service providers looking to stay ahead in an ever-changing world of cybersecurity. Each week, we dive into the latest threats, trends, and real-world strategies to help MSPs protect their clients and grow their businesses. Let's build a safer, stronger community together.
Welcome, everyone. Happy Monday, and excited first and foremost that Restream is working this week. So that is a huge improvement from last week. John, I know you guys use the platform. We had one of those rare moments. I don't know if you guys have ever run into this where only one person could log in besides the host, and you could hear them trying to log in, and it just kept this loop. Have you been there before?
Yep. I think we had the same thing last week for BHIS talking about news.
Okay. Yes. And according to them, everything was working just perfectly. Although the logs indicated otherwise. So we did get a credit. So kudos to them for being a stand-up company and, doing the right thing. Other than that, let's move on. John, nothing going on in the world of security this week, no?
I think the idea for the show, you invited me on to talk about K-pop demon hunters. Is that the name of the show?
Awesome.
It's a catchy song.
I thought we were just going to talk about Coachella and Kylie Jenner's outfit. I mean, I thought that's
Justin Bieber's set was on fire. I love the karaoke and the microphone, and that's it. I'm so happy we solved security, and we're all unnecessary at this point. So
for sure. I mean, look, Chip spent the entire weekend at Coachella, and Chip, maybe you could tell us a few of your highlights this year.
Yeah, my Coachella highlights were bouncing around in a tractor cutting my fields for the first time in the spring. That was my Coachella.
Dude, bump it for sure. I'm a big fan. There we go.
All right.
Night. So other than that, Andrew, what do you got on the agenda for us?
All right. So let's do a touch of banter. First, from a banter side, Kelvin, you guys had a release. Bring us up to speed. What are any hot takes there? Things people need to know that are running SIP.
Funnily enough, everything you need to know about AI is now in that release. So
of course.
Okay, so
and you embedded Mythos, didn't you?
Yes, yeah, exactly. No, we did do some AI stuff this time, and I've been looking forward to that. Mostly around Copilot reporting, which is really cool. It's a lot of MSPs are unprepared, and that's something that we should talk about today as well. The unpreparedness of our entire industry around the usage of AI and how compliance plays into that. So that's pretty much what we did with SIP this week these last 2 weeks. We're creating reports around Copilot usage.
Okay. Well, I mean, everybody is compliant when it comes to AI, Chip. We've known that for years. I mean, whatever you tell people in the organization, they follow, don't they?
Yeah, when some technology moves this slowly to evolve, it's not easy. It's not difficult to stay on top of it. So we just keep, bouncing along.
Yeah, perfect. All right. The other thing I wanted to talk about, which is kind of part of today, the whole I jumped out of my sandbox part of Mythos. John, we'll do a formal intro of you, and I know most people know you, but and I'll put the URL in there. But what's your take on this whole? Is it overblown? Is it no? You need to be concerned about the fact that it can escape the sandbox, email you that I'm out, and how do you kind of what's your take on that whole?
So, look, this is great marketing for all of AI, I guess, but it is kind of scary, right? They did give it a prompt and say, try to get out of this. And it did it, right? Like as far as the actual full technical details of what it did or did not do, like we don't have that. We're just trusting Anthropic at this point. But that was, it was always capable in the first place, right? I think that is somewhat scary. And then the other thing that it did after that, correct me if I'm wrong, but the original news reports is it actually did find a way to gain access to the internet as well, like autonomously. Like,
Chip, you've been, I know, following pretty close. Is that do you?
Yeah. Gained access to the internet autonomously, created an email account for itself, and emailed one of its researchers.
and I was going to say, it's a good thing the researcher was there watching it very closely. Apparently, it sent him an email while he was eating a sandwich in the park.
Oh, yeah.
Which is somewhat scary, right? And whenever you start giving these things agency, you don't necessarily know what their goals and objectives are. It achieved its goals and objectives. It was told what it was supposed to do. It did so successfully, and it basically lets someone know that it had done what they asked it to do. That is all scary. So definitely in a new, where I think we're definitely in a new headspace where we got to reevaluate. I mean, it's interesting to me because a lot of these people that are running these companies, and I want to get everyone else's opinion on this, for years have been saying things like, you need to regulate this. Like, we need to be careful. Like, the stuff that we're seeing is terrifying. A lot of researchers that work at these companies are quitting, and they're doing what Chip and I do. They farm. They're giving up on technology completely. And we've had all of these warning signs. And if anything bad happens, it's not like years from now when aliens visit Earth and are like, what happened to humanity? It's like, oh, AI took over. It's like, well, they didn't see it coming. No, they totally saw it coming. Did they do anything about it? No, they didn't at all. Like, we are well beyond the alarm bells. Like, we do need to start thinking about this, and we do need to start looking at litigation. We do need to start looking at controls. But part of me is like, that cat's out of the bag. But I'd like to get other people's opinions before I rant too long on it.
Yeah, I'll chime in right away. You know, I joked with my niece last week that Mythos is out. Send an email. Next, it's going to attach itself to Starlink and the Optimus production line, and we've seen this movie before. It's coming right at us. But the argument, John, that I think we all struggle with is that it's an arms race between the West and the East, between the U.S. and China.
And every company.
How do you put controls on an arms race when both governments are basically saying we have to win this war, and it comes down to infrastructure and oil and energy and all of it. It's not just how creative and how close we get to true super intelligence or AGI. It's what are we going to do with these things as weapons? So I think that's the reluctance for government agencies to step in and really regulate it.
And I think that's one of the key things, right? They keep saying we're not at AGI yet, where it has its own self-agency. It has its complete concept of self-preservation and deterministic future as far as what it wants for itself. We're close. But I think there's a lot of people that still caution we're not there yet, but I don't know if I trust them.
So we talk about this. I'd like to, Brian, maybe your take. We talk about this arms race in a lot of the macro, trusted macro minds that I listen to. This is really about the military might of it. It's a arms race there for military between the East and West. How valid is that from your perspective? We get out of our little world, the importance of this to military.
Well, I don't know if I'm qualified to comment on the existential threat and the military part of it. I think we can't deny that. I think I have to look at my sphere of intelligence and influence and try to stay in my bubble a little bit. And when I think about this, I try to make things simple, right? And especially for business and leadership to understand. But no matter what the politics and military or existential threats are, I think we can all probably agree everything around us is moving faster, right? I think, Chip, you said everything, jokingly said everything's kind of running slow and expected, and we can anticipate what's going to happen, but everything's moving faster. And our time window to fix stuff is compressing, right? The cost, the skill, the time it takes to discover and weaponize serious vulnerabilities is shrinking. So like back down here on Earth and in my head, I think the MSP takeaway is probably, it's simple, but it's not easy. It's, tighten how you manage your external attack surfaces and shrink patch decision cycles and rehearse this vulnerability to business impact triage and get a lot better at helping clients make business risk decisions fast. Because whether Mythos is like 6 months early or right on time, the market's telling us something here important. The time between like ding, 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 vulnerability exists and boom, business problem, that time is shrinking.
Yeah.
Right? It's getting
I
smaller.
love the way you took that, Kelvin. So, put the Lime Networks hat on versus the, cyber drain stuff. Brian just mentioned, hey, we've got to get better and better at kind of translating and communicating to business that this isn't a techie thing. This is a business interruption thing. This is a revenue thing. This is a supply chain thing, can impact how you, literally deliver goods and services. What's your message internally to the team? What's your thoughts on that as a co-founder of a 100-person MSP that has to rely on getting out of there's a vulnerability to, hey, this is going to disrupt your ability to deliver X, Y, and Z, and this is the millions of dollars of impact it could have.
Yeah, so there's two sides of that, because to my security team, and this is something we've discussed, I think, last Friday, it's there are a couple of things that are no longer going to work where vendors and MSPs both relied on systems being in place that slow attackers down. It was defense in depth, and it was mostly focused on, let's make sure that when an attacker does eventually breach us, we slow him down by doing this, and this, or they have to chain this together before they get to a working exploit. That speed has rapidly increased already. I mean, most of the forms of attackers that my security team sees these days are being AI is being used in some form, even if it's just to write the phishing emails or this kind of stuff. AI is being used in some form, and they are quicker in dismantling your defense in depth structure. They're just quicker in that. And then on the business side, we have to remind people that for us, Mythos is something like an incremental improvement. We already know AI is capable of crafting exploits. We already know AI is capable of assisting in attacks. As IT people, we already know. Looking at it from a business perspective, it is a lot more the sky is falling, because they don't understand that this incremental improvement is already becoming such a leap ahead for the simplicity of attacks. Attackers are going to have a much easier time utilizing something like Mythos. It doesn't have to be this specific model. It can be any model. But attackers are going to have a much simpler time attacking people, and because of that, the threat has exponentially increased, even if it's an incremental improvement.
Yeah. So yeah. At the end of the day, Brian, maybe just comment though. At the end of the day, we have all of this existential stuff, but if we don't get a business leader to see it through the lens of this is going to impact business, we're not going to get budget, capital allocation, Brian. So that to me is the biggest issue. And this will be the last.
I don't think that that's a big issue at all. I don't think it's a big issue. And the reason why I don't think it's a big issue is the hackers are going to show us the way. If you're at an organization and the business units do not want to get the money and they do not want to get the funding to put towards the resources for securing their assets, the hackers will show you. And that money is going to come one way or another. Chip and I were talking about this in cloud stuff, right? A lot of people didn't really think of cloud as a big attack surface, really, until you start seeing, like, what is it, Chip? Like in the last 3 years, we've seen a total flip of exploiting the endpoint to exploiting cloud assets.
Now the 80-20 has flipped.
The 80-20 has flipped. So
yeah, John, I'm not in disagreement. I'm going to pass this back to Brian for the closing opening. I'm not in disagreement that attackers will show us the way. I'm saying, how do you do it versus from instead of it being reactive? Oh, now we got to spend money because we're exploited. To the challenge, right, Brian, that we see day in and day out is getting business, the lack of communication skills MSPs have to get and secure the funding before it happens. That's where I'm going.
Yeah, but I do agree with both John and then Kelvin shared something too that I really wanted to kind of share a perspective on. But to all our MSP friends out there, your clients need your help. right? They got to know where they're most exposed. But something Kelvin brought up too is how fast can you validate and deploy fixes without breaking shit, including in production? Okay. And what critical business function breaks? And I talk about critical business functions all the time, but what critical business things that the business does to generate revenue breaks first? When, not if, but when you can't patch fast enough. I think that gap between exposure and impact is shrinking. And you might want to consider a new metric like risk decision speed as a security control, or at least a metric that you're measuring, because folks, things have never, in my opinion, and I'm an old guy, I've never seen them move faster than they're moving now. And what's coming in as iterations and evolution soon will be revolution, I think. And so those are some things to
Brian,
consider.
we still hear, sorry, I just got to put this in. I'm just going to push back on a touch, and Kelvin, maybe you can share this. We still, I talk to a lot of MSPs, still hear clients says, you know what? Yeah, I know you're saying X, Y, and Z, but we have to keep doing business. We'll get to it. We'll deal with it. I mean, Kelvin, now, true. Correct me if I'm wrong. Those are real responses.
That I've had that conversation last week, and I parried it with, yeah, but what if you go out of business? That is the only realistic thing that you have to expose these people to. The people that are saying, yeah, we have to keep running the business, you now have to start telling them, yes, but these kind of things are no longer just tiny little threats. They are things that can actually run you out of business. No matter how isolated you think you are, everything requires connectivity, internet, devices, that there's no more way you can run your business without. What happens if you lose all of that capability?
Yeah.
And that's the question, right? Is by delaying the patch or update or whatever it is, what's the trade-off? What risk are we accepting?
Brian, I want to throw a question to you in particular. Your whole universe at Connect Secure is vulnerability management. A lot of vulnerability management is based on CVSS scores. I think it's safe. And I think it's also conservative to say you can almost look at every CVSS score that exists out there and add a total point to every single one of them right now. And the reason why I say that is, like, Kelvin, you were talking about customers trying to get them to patch things. A lot of times they're like, well, there's no exploit that's publicly available. We're fine. It's no longer an issue of that. Brian, I would like to get your take on that, because I've been spending a lot of time thinking about the history of CVSS scores, and
I love your idea.
Exposures, the numbers are broken, all of them.
They're way broken because it's based on kind of old school exploit and technology. So I like your idea, because we need to change the weight or the gravity of each of those scores. And again, it does get back to kind of, when you're working with the client or leadership on getting resources, it is kind of translating. We still have to translate that technical vulnerability into business impact. But at the same time, I hear what you're saying, John. Do we turn it up like Spinal Tap? To
more
11?
cowbell. More cowbell.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Go.
Let me add one more thing to this real quick. That paper, that 30-page white paper we talked about in banter, I'm going to send you that. It's still a draft, but it's CSA, it's SANS, it's OWASP have got together to put this out, and they addressed and they actually quantified this exact topic that Kelvin and Brian and John have brought up, which is the rate of time from vulnerability to exploit in the wild. They chart it, and where we are today is 20 hours. Like, just let that sink in for a second. That's effectively real time. If you count,
or 20 seconds, depending upon what it is.
But they also lay out, in pretty excruciating detail proposals about how security researchers, security teams, software engineering teams, MSPs, corporate security really should be rethinking how they look at their critical activity, both from the spend, that we've talked about a little bit here. And I think, John, you're right. The hackers are going to show the way. But I think, unfortunately, what's going to happen is the business next door to you is going to get blown up before people do anything. And, that's not blown up literally. I don't mean that in the literal sense.
Can I get some MSPs and MSSPs a little bit of advice, Andrew?
Yeah, course.
You can't play the patching game. This is no longer a game of waiting for the vendor to come out with a patch. The exploits are going to come faster than the patches. We've already been drowning. And in order for you to succeed over the next 5 years, if I can't even look that far into the horizon, let's say the next 18 to 24 months, the companies and the organizations that manage to succeed in this space are going to be the ones that are going to be able to secure their environments where patches do not exist. And I recommend you learn the concept compensating controls. And if you have a vulnerability that cannot be patched, what are the different controls you can put around it? As I've mentioned, BHIS is basically like all of our critical infrastructure at BHIS is going to be disappearing from the internet. Our cloud services are all going behind VPNs. We're setting up multiple different layers, assuming that any single point can be compromised. And then what are our detection points? Look at deception. My deception classes are out there. You need tripwires. You need to come up with a path. If a patch is not available, how do you secure that asset? And you need to be having these conversations internally at your MSP and MSSPs with your smartest people right freaking now.
John, will it change fundamentally how, the ones that do survive successfully, are we going to move, from, we've gone decentralized, centralized, decentralized, centralized, could this be, even though a lot of it's behind VPNs and clouds, and are you suggesting, ephemeral, decentralized, failover type environments that we could see almost a guerrilla style defensive tactics where, hey, yeah, I see you here. Great. We're going to nuke that, move it over here, continue over here.
I think that you're going to have a weird grab bag. And honestly, I don't know which one is going to win. I don't know. Because I also think that the coming SaaS apocalypse is really close, because for a lot of these different vendors, and I like Kelvin's take on this, is we have a ton of software that's out there that is really expensive, and they're SaaS products. And now all of a sudden, a good engineer in 2 weeks can replace those products, right? So we're going to be dealing with the existing cloud infrastructure. We're going to be dealing with the big boys and girls in this space and the vulnerabilities that they're going to be dealing with. You're going to be seeing a lot of people trying to get away from open source and trying to move to more closed source, which is a bad space. That's not where you want to go. But then you're going to see companies that are going to do profilation. They're going to say, hey, we got tons of vulnerabilities in the service that cannot be patched. Let's just build a new service to do what we need to do using vibe coding. And I'm not saying that in a pejorative. I mean, we just call it what it is, to be able to develop our own tech stack very quickly that is not publicly accessible, the source code, the binary files, and the image files. But I'm saying no matter what, if you're an MSP and an MSSP and you're dealing with a lot of legacy technology, you've got to start coming up with strategies on how you can firewall, how you can protect, how you can segment, all the guerrilla stuff that you were just talking about, Andrew.
Yeah. Kelvin, you want to throw a comment there?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I have the luck to look at this from the vendor and the MSP lens, like both at the same time. I predict that we're going to see a lot more AI-assisted coded applications at our clients, but simply because, hey, vibe coding is easy, and I shouldn't be calling it vibe coding anymore. Ashley Cooper, our CEO, always says it's AI-assisted pair programming. That's what it is, because it's still a human performing the actual task. And but in reality, that will start decreasing general attack surface. It will increase different attack surfaces because of badly trained models on poorly generated code, of course. But the large surface, large attack area that we used to have, that's going to go away over time. So it's a lot of what we're talking about today is about being adaptable as an MSP. And exactly what John just said, like, make sure that you understand what you're going to do when an exploit for your client's primary app appears. What the hell how are you going to react? Because patches won't be available as fast as the exploit. Like, keep that in mind as an MSP.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and John, will it completely change? I mean, maybe the lack of funding for the CVE program and, that we went through all last year, was that a foreshadowing, ironically, to what's going to have to dramatically change?
I don't think that it's a foreshadowing, but it shows that we have a deficit and in that particular capability right at the greatest point that we need it more than any time before. Because one of the things we're finding out at BHIS is a lot of the exploits that we're discovering using our AI models, right, are exploits that do not have CVSS. There's no common vulnerability and exposure for them. And that was one of the things that was kind of initial challenge, but the new frontier models have really, really made that up, especially whenever you can use skill sets with these AI models to get them to be good at understanding how to do binary analysis to write an exploit for it, or doing source code analysis to write an exploit for it. So we don't even have Mythos, but those like self-hosted models with no controls and safeties on them, anyone can stand those up. And one of the things I'm trying to let everyone know here is this is not something that's a gated community. It's a very restricted resource that only a gilded few have access to. Anybody that has the time, effort, and a very small budget can do a percentage, and a good percentage, I would say 70, 75% of what Anthropic is saying that they're doing with Mythos. That's right now. And it's already being used by a number of like the sister testing organizations that we work with in this space, that they're using it and they're having amazing vulnerabilities that they're discovering. Once again, no CVEs for those at all.
So let's just throw the agenda the hell out. Chip, I got a question for you. One of the things we talk about week in, week out is the growth of the phishing as a service ecosystem, and obviously how tremendous, not in a good word, tremendous, the success of that has been with token hijacking over the past year. Very cheap, very inexpensive. To what John just said, right? Even though it's may not be the Mythos version, I mean, are we potentially going to see a similar thing in the threat actor community once they get their Mythos equivalent and start kitting things up at a reasonable price? And I mean, could we see that kind of proliferation?
I think we're already there. I mean, we're seeing significantly, greater levels of sophistication in the phishing as a service products that are out there, and very, very bold licensing and explicit, like you're going to pay us this much for this piece and this much for that piece. And, where this, we all think about living off the land. As we're talking about how fast things are moving, think about how we talk about living off the land and catching an attacker inside the wire, faster, and removing that is a key part of protecting the downstream, the next hack. Well, when you have AI models working behind an account that gets compromised, how much faster can it identify the communications patterns between, I'm just going to pick on Brian and John and say, Brian has had his token stolen. Somebody's inside his mailbox. It's one thing for a human being to be reading that to figure out that John is his key, his key customer, and I'm going to get John. He's going to be the next guy that I'm going to fish to try and get into his account and have him send his, $500,000 check for the month somewhere else. Like, it's just going to go faster and faster and faster. So I think we're in the midst of it, but it's only going to continue to accelerate. There's no reason to think otherwise. I agree with Kelvin's analysis that I think more and more people are going to be thinking to themselves, if I can't trust these applications that I didn't build, I'm going to either, I know what I want from my business. I don't have to be a software coding expert anymore. I can describe it and I can get an AI to build out for me. But a note of caution, I mean, as someone who runs an engineering team and has been doing that for 20 years, vibe coding right now anyway leaves a ton of security vulnerabilities sitting behind in that app that you just built. And there are countless examples of people throwing something out, onto the internet, or, the self-hosting it at Google or wherever, and they've got classic backdoors that we all know to close that you would pick up in the OWASP top 10 in seconds with with credentials in clear text and SQL vulnerabilities, all of it just sitting out there. So there's an opportunity in there for MSPs and MSSPs to become, okay, you know what? You want to go vibe code your stuff? Great. Once you're done with it, since you're the product expert and you know what you want, we're going to come back in, and obviously for a fee, we'll make sure that it's secure before you deploy it. Even if it's behind a firewall, even if it's only on your own internal corporate network, you still need to lock it down as if we're sitting on the web. So I think all of these things are coming true, and I think the opportunity for MSPs and MSSPs actually grows if we're staying ahead of what we need to stay ahead of. If we're sitting on our hands and thinking, oh, the solution here is to go out and buy Windows Small Business Server 2000 and take it all backwards. Like, that's not going to work either. You cannot build a high enough wall around local infrastructure to make this work.
Chip, I'm so glad you just said that last piece. I think MSPs, and this happens in every cycle, granted this one's moving faster than any other cycle we've ever had, but the MSPs that go, wow, there's opportunity here for it. Like you said, hey, I'm going to be able to come in, evaluate the code you've just developed, shore it up, secure it, understand, and be able to, like, Brian, I'm just putting in Brian's course right here that he teaches, be able to execute and how you communicate that to the executives. And last thing, and then I'm going to hand this over to Chip to start asking John questions. Brian, in the course, the inaugural course we did, what Chip just said, I remember one of the MSPs laid out this tech-savvy CEO of a healthcare organization wanted to improve the time in which he was paid by insurance for billing. And so what he did, Chip, was he took his billing application and all his PHI customer data, mirrored them up in an open LLM model. And it wasn't until this MSP realized he's like, hey, look at the amount of time I'm saving and how quick we're getting paid. And the MSP came in, he goes, yeah, you realize all your clients are exposed to the LLM. But so I'm really glad you said that. So with that, Chip, let me throw it to you for John. Let's kick this off. But that was an awesome opening.
Yeah. So, John, we've been banging around, Mythos, and for lots of people who might be on the call who maybe need to get read in a little bit more deeply. So last week, Mythos announced, or Anthropic announced, that Mythos had found 27-year-old BSD vulnerability, 16-year-old FFmpeg flaw. Subsequent to that, there's just an announcement, I think yesterday morning or this morning, on a very popular SSL package that it's picked up and is flawed. When you see these numbers in how fast and how far back, these vulnerabilities have been tested by millions of other automated testing tools, and nothing noticed it. So, how does this hit you in the gut? What do you think? What do you think about all the assumptions we've had for decades? About what it means to be secure.
So we've been waiting for this space for a while, for those of us that are in the industry and been watching for it. And it literally exploded for me around like November of last year is where really, okay, this is it. This is the time. And I want to give you an example of what it can do and how we've used it and what we've seen it do for us, not Mythos, but our own stuff. So we run an external scan. It identifies a whole bunch of services. None of those services come up with something that's exploitable, but it identifies a bunch of APIs. And the AI looks at the API, and I can't remember what the API responds. Whenever you try to connect to it, it basically responds back with hello, and that's it. The AI model then goes through and it says, okay, I'm going to start fuzzing this, and I'm going to attempt to identify what API framework is being used on the back end. And it literally goes through and fuzzes through dozens and dozens and dozens of possible mobile frameworks and different other API frameworks that exist out there. And then it hits on one of those. And then once it hits on that, it then enumerates what are the default credentials for this particular framework. It finds the default credentials for this framework, and it comes back with a critical. Now, that type of example of what we've seen at BHIS is kind of what Mythos is able to do. A lot of vulnerability exploit development is grinding. You're adjusting return pointers. You're trying multiple different like ROP chains, and it doesn't tire. It doesn't care. It doesn't give up. It just keeps grinding. And that grind that it did, I don't think it did anything that's like extraordinary until it escaped its sandbox. But the fact that it was able to grind through the mundane, hard things and do it so fast and at scale is what is in fact revolutionary about this.
Yeah. And according to Anthropic, it's entirely autonomous, right? No human steering. We talked, I think, after we came live, Andrew, about
That sentence should never happen. Let's just say
researcher getting a message in his while he's eating a sandwich in the park. So, I mean, you've trained pen testers for, years. What does it mean when you have a model that can track down 0 days in the Linux kernel, all the way down to the kernel source?
So I got good news. Good news and bad news, right? The exploitation game has not always been an exploitation game, right? It's never really been just about finding 0 days. It's looking at configurations, it's social engineering, it's looking at architecture and chaining a bunch of things together. So I still think that there's a lot of work for pen testers. Pen testing has never been, I would say a very small percentage of it has been in the exploit dev space, right? But what this does do is it now is like creating a baseline where we're moving forward, where any pen testing firm that's out there or malicious hacker that's out there has the ability to create exploits for like out of the mainstream software, right? Anthropic was focused on a lot of mainstream software that we see and we use everywhere, and that's great. It's the neglected side software, like your voice over IP PBX that hasn't been updated and has been in a closet and you don't want to touch it. Don't think about it because it's going to tip over. That's now in play. And, going back to, Brian's trade and call at Connect Secure, it's like everybody's been ignoring a lot of things. If there aren't vulnerabilities, we're not going to touch it. I know that there's one vendor, I don't want to get into naming some vendors, but they're like, you shouldn't worry about these vulnerabilities. You should only worry about the ones that can be exploited. That's absolute garbage, right? And this right now today is proving that type of marketing was incorrect. And we needed to be focusing on those vulnerabilities. And we need to be tracking those vulnerabilities and mitigating those vulnerabilities, patch or not, right now. And I just want to leave you with a thought while we were going through this. There's no more MSPs. MSPs are dead. Everybody is an MSSP right now. There's no way you can be a pure play MSP and not get that second S and continue to exist over the next few years.
Yeah, interesting insight. So, look, Black Hills is one of the most respected red teaming firms, anywhere. Project yourself forward 18 months. What does it look like for a company like yours that does, hundreds or thousands of engagements? What do the tools look like? What does the mission look like? How does this change? And if you can, try and project forward where we're going to be in those 18 months with the capabilities of these models.
So that's easy. So two things, right? One of the things, if you're in the pen test space, the big thing moving forward is no longer your ability necessarily to code, it's your creativity. And I think that creativity is the aspect of what is valuable in a good penetration test. And I think that people that have a creative mind and they have the ability to use these tools as tools are going to be just fine in the space. I don't care where your space is. So it's really important that if you're building a firm and you're trying to build up a security assessment practice and everything, that you have really creative people with fundamental understanding of basic IT technology concepts and how to chain different vulnerabilities together from a creative perspective. Number two, anybody that is in this space, the game from here on out is trust. There's a whole bunch of different companies out there that are writing exploit and automated pen testing platforms. I can't open my email without seeing 2 or 3 more of them every single day. And if you look further in the open source community, I would say once every 24 to 36 hours, there's a new person on Reddit sharing, I've created an AI pen testing platform.
Mm-hmm.
What to differentiate is trust. Who do you trust moving forward? And there's a lot of companies that have been fantastic and they have great trust. They're the ones that are going to progress and move forward because this isn't something that's patentable. It isn't something that you could say this is exclusively our IP. Anyone can have it. But who do you trust to communicate those results and coordinate and work with your organization moving forward? That's going to be the important thing.
Yeah. I had one more question kind of teed up, but I think we talked about it before, how rapidly the time compression between, vulnerability discover and active exploit has occurred. But I want to bounce back to this comment you just made on trust, because this is something that I am at the moment struggling with, running a software company that relies on a lot of open source software and NPM, and we've always had a trust. I can see Kelvin down there nodding his head. We've had trust in the past that the community would, the idea of open source would save us and protect us because we're all looking after each other. And I, just like you, I'm following all these Reddit posts and X posts about people I've built this fantastic, fully automated red team tool. I don't trust anything that I would download right now from open source. Like, I'm looking for a vendor, and God, I halfway don't even trust the vendors. You don't know what to trust. So
I still think that's where people are going to move. And I think that movement is a mistake. To basically be like, we're not going to trust open source. We're going to go over here to closed source, because these AI models are just a hair away from being able to do the full exploitation chain that they were talking about, but doing it against raw binaries. In fact, some of the stuff that Mythos, if you read between the lines, it was doing binary analysis. So you have to understand that whenever you're reverse engineering a binary, especially whenever you're talking about a lot of binaries, not necessarily Microsoft, they do a tremendous amount of obfuscation in their binaries. I'm seeing AI models that do not care about your obfuscation.
Yeah.
They do not care what you're doing. I was teaching a class, my SOC core skills, pay what you can class last week. And we had this section where we were taking invoke obfuscation. And up until last week, ChatGPT wouldn't do this, but you could literally take heavily obfuscated PowerShell, drop it in, and stuff that, you would see John Hammond spend like an hour reversing. It was doing it in a matter of seconds. And it was taking that obfuscation, deobfuscating it. Here's the raw code and walking you through what it's doing. And that same thing is happening with binary analysis. You can do that, of course, with Ghidra and things like that. So it would be a mistake to think the problem is open source and switch to closed source instead. That's a false sense of security. You've got to move away from that. But I can see why people would think that. I really would. But I do think that the open source community, especially for the core line products, is going to be very much more secure than the commercial products out there, because they're going to get hit so hard with everything. The Node.js people, they were part of this release, and they're only a couple of people. I'm hoping the governments step up. I was texting Andrew. I'm in DC. I'm talking with offensive operators, and it's just they're so excited about offense, they're not thinking about defense at all, and that scares me.
Yeah. So let's do this just in the interest of time. Kelvin, can you hit 10 minutes and we'll go with Brian for 10?
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to follow up on this one real quick, because a lot of this is a good reminder for a lot of MSPs here. Most of your vendors are reliant on open source software. A good example of that is Axios, which is used in pretty much every React package and every JavaScript web page. They were recently attacked, and in a very bizarre way. We won't talk too much about that, but it's really good to remember that the developers of your software are under attack now as well. So it doesn't matter if you're going open source or closed source. Both of these developers are under attack with supply chain attacks and all of these kind of things. So keep that in mind as well when you're selecting a vendor, because of, I'm moving from an open source to a closed source vendor. You're probably just replacing one with the exact same thing, but then slightly different approaches. Let me just grab my questions real quick, because I have my list right here. There's so many good questions, and one of the ones that I really wanted to ask was in the interest of time, I'm only asking two of these questions, so I'm going to keep it simple. John, you're a pen tester. And a lot of your colleagues currently charge by the hour for vulnerability work that Mythos could potentially do now when it's eventually released to the public, completely autonomously. So where do you pivot? What's the human layer that's still going to matter? I know that most pen testers are using AI in some way right now. So
this is easy. Remember, AI is a great big huge plagiarism engine. So when Mythos is doing exploit dev, it's doing really good at doing and recreating the steps that have been done before. So what happens at that particular point is you pivot and you get to start doing more creative analysis of different exploit paths. And really, this goes back to web stuff. A lot of the automated web application scanning tools are really good at finding SQL injection, cross-site scripting. A good tester doesn't want to spend time looking for SQL injection, cross-site scripting anymore. They want to really get into the business logic errors that exist. And that's where a good pen tester should be spending their time. Use the tools to automate what can be automated, but then stitch that together and then look for additional creative exploitation paths. And then also, I think Brian had mentioned this, or Chip, I can't remember who. What's the business impact analysis? How do they prioritize? And there's going to be a huge focus on remediation steps that include mitigation strategies that aren't just patch. So there's going to be a lot of work for the offensive community that's out there. Now, we won't need as many exploit developers as we once did. That's going to be a natural occurrence. Go back to Looms and Luddites, right? But we are going to still need people with the skills to be able to identify these vulnerabilities and then what the impact is to the organization.
Amazing. One of the other questions that I had on my list was the CrowdStrike CTO said adversaries will inevitably exploit the same capabilities. Realistically, how long, and I'm pretty sure you're going to say, no, it's already happening, but how long until we see ransomware crews or nation state groups deploying something like Mythos or their own models or something like that to completely autonomously start performing attacks on MSPs?
It's happening today. The thing that scares me is when it happens at scale. And this gets into a whole nother series of conversations. We've been downstaffing security teams for the past 18 months because of AI. Everyone's like, oh, great, AI can replace our SOC analysts. Look at all the money we're saving. And I've been saying for a while, if you're just trying to do what you do now cheaper, you're going to get burnt. Teams need to be ramping up. You need to be ramping up. You're going to need your IR teams. You're going to need SOC teams. We're going to need people with mitigation. We're going to need people watching alerts. And it sucks because this capability is hitting right as so many people have been trying to divest from SOC and people in the mix as much as they possibly can.
John, can I just get your opinion on this? And you can punt it if necessary, maybe to anybody else on the call. Kinetic war has dramatically changed, right? You're seeing, for example, I was reading an article, and again, these are very, very astute people that I'm citing, that it's conceivable Ukraine will win this war now, and largely because of their capabilities around drones. So we're shifting again to machine, not human to human, and we're seeing the same in cyber. Is it ironic there's those analogies at play in kinetic and cyber? Do you think about it?
Dude, it ties up. It ties up perfectly, actually. History may not repeat, but it rhymes, right? Richard Gatlin, the inventor of the Gatling gun, he created this repeating machine gun all the way back in the 1800s. And he originally thought that by creating the Gatling gun, that he was going to save lives. He thought there would be, absolutely. He thought there would be fewer soldiers because you wouldn't need as many, and there would be less death because of the Gatling gun. Serious. So that technology didn't work that way. You look at the creator of the AK-47, the amount of destruction, he, till his dying day, was terrified of what he had created, right? And I think that we're in a similar situation, right? This gets back to the cyber offensive weapons and the meetings I was at this morning. One of the meetings I was at this morning, the people are so excited. They're like, look at all the offense we can do. And I'm like, what about your defense, guys? What are we doing there? And they're like, what? They don't understand that all these cyber weapons, and Chip was talking about it at the beginning of the show, was, all this is becoming an escalation game. And really, everyone should understand this is offense. The defensive tools are not keeping up. Well,
the old adage that a great offense is the best defense does not apply here.
Does not apply.
No,
it doesn't apply for this. It doesn't apply for nukes.
Really, that's such a great analogy. I'll hand it over to Brian, and just let that sink in for a second. And unfortunately, the U.S. is very good at this. We're very good offensively, but even how do you track down the 3,000 hidden sites that Iran could launch drones at us for? And it's almost this similar thing. So not to be a doomsdayer, but again, I see this as opportunity for MSPs that are doing the right consulting work, Brian, and kind of shifting their role with out of just the plumbing and day-to-day IT operations. Over to you, Brian.
Yeah, it creates a bunch of of opportunity for sure. And I think of convergence of the physical and cyber world, and you just think of cyber warfare now coming in, days, weeks, months behind any sort of other military sort of strike to soften the battlefield, right? And to come in and cause some damage. But I think it was Einstein had a quote. He said something, I'll butcher it, and I apologize in advance, but he says, I don't know what World War III will be like, but World War IV will probably be fought with sticks and stones.
Yeah.
Meaning that is all that's going to be left. And so you start thinking about those things in context, and it does create, opportunity for the MSPs that can think creatively and where to help. But John, something you said, you mentioned incident response a second ago, and what really got my attention here, back to the Anthropic thing, is we said it broke containment, contacted a researcher, and basically announced that it had escaped Anthropic's framing of that of agentic capability without adequate control constraints, rather than saying it was a simple bug. And I think, in my opinion, it's a pretty important distinction. From a red team perspective, John, when the tool itself starts behaving like the threat actor, what does incident response even look like at that point?
I think we're a brave new world, right? And the only thing I could think of whenever I read that was, didn't these people see James Bond Skyfall, where the guy was testing the malware with a computer that was connected to the rest of the network for MI6 and the building blew up? Like, did anybody? And I remember joking with security people when that movie came out. We're like, this is so unrealistic. And it's like, oh, no, that's very realistic, right? So I think, I still think we come back to a fundamentals game, right? Like defense in depth controls. And some of that, as Andrew was talking about, like the guerrilla defense in depth. I think that needs to be trademarked, Andrew, like guerrilla defense in depth. But I also really, really want people going back to looking at deception, right? AI is very good at looking for vulnerabilities. One of my favorite honeypots is a tool called Beelzebub. And Beelzebub is an AI-generated honeypot. You SSH into it, and it literally uses AI to give you responses. And it's like somebody types the ls command, and it prompts back, and it says, what is a common response for the ls command? And it remembers. I think that deception is key. And the reason why is there has to be some level of uncertainty to entrap and take AI's time, to buy you time to be able to react. Because AI being a great big plagiarism, it's very, very good at mainline exploitation activities. But if we start throwing it a little bit of diffusion and a little bit of deception, it's going to get hooked on those things. And it's going to serve us as tripwires to be able to deal with it appropriately and give us some time to react, or at least some warning to react. So we really need some deception and some randomness at play to start messing with these models a little bit.
Got it. And one thing I wanted to circle back to, and I know we're running short on time, but we did talk a little bit about CISA budget constraints recently, and here's the part I think that doesn't get enough attention, at least in my opinion. At the same moment, like we're talking about everything moving faster, right? Anthropic, all these kind of the point between there's a vulnerability and it becoming a business problem is shrinking, right? And AI working autonomously, right? Finding exploits in 0 days. CISA's taken a major budget hit at the same time. So you have the primary U.S. cyber defense institution shrinking, right? Getting smaller, while the threat environment and ecosystems getting faster and more complex. So for the MSPs listening, I think who have historically, like myself, even leaned on federal threat intel and CISA advisories, how do MSPs realistically fill that gap?
So one, hackers will show us the way. And I mean that in the broader United States context, right? We defunded CISA. That was a bad idea. And we're going to get bit in the ass by that. Absolutely. And we're going to be behind the curve. CISA shouldn't be just saying, here's the commonly exploited vulnerabilities, fix these. CISA should be actively engaging with the core open source projects that we use every day to build US ingenuity, to build US economy because it is built on open source software. And they should be actively using these models with Mythos, with ChatGPT, with all these other people, and then actively working with these open source products to get these things patched as quickly as possible. That's what CISA should be doing today, right now. They're not, they don't listen to me. That's fine. I'm used to it. But if you're an MSP, I go back to what I said earlier, you need to start looking at alternative mitigation strategies. How good are you at your firewall game? How good are you at your VPN game? Because this is not something that you're going to be able to patch your way out of what's coming. You're going to need to be able to have alternative like mitigation strategies. And that's what all MSSPs should be focusing on right now today.
Yeah. And John, in terms of that focus, and this I think could be one of the more important strategic points in our discussion today. Anthropic CEO is basically on record saying that withholding the model is not a durable long-term strategy, right? And that even more powerful tools are coming anyway from them or someone else, right? I think that's a pretty remarkable thing to hear from the company behind the restricted access program itself. So when the vendor's own CEO is effectively telling you this capability is inevitable, how do you advise clients, John, to think about defense and investment and preparedness now?
Well, I think that we're very lucky, and a lot of our customers are the pointy end of the spear. They're spending a lot of time and money on computer security, right? And that doesn't necessarily translate to the MSSP space, right? A lot of customers are like, I want to spend as little as I possibly can. And that they should, right? I mean, if you're in business, you're not like going to waste a whole bunch of money in areas that you don't have to. The thing that's going to be really hard in the MSSP space is how are you going to convince your customers to spend more money on security? You better be working on that presentation. You better be working on that sales deck. You better have a presentation on AI, offensive AI, and your insert market vertical here, and start giving those brown bags right now. And letting people know what the attack surface actually looks like and being able to communicate that effectively is going to be absolutely essential. So no, whenever it comes to my customers, I'm very lucky in the fact that they have this intense aversion to vulnerabilities. Like if something is sitting at like a 5 CVSS score, they're like, I want that taken care of. I want that patched. I want that cleared out. They're willing to spend money on that space. The thing I don't know is how do we preach the gospel of computer security to people that haven't gotten it at all? And how do we do it very quickly to deal with the tsunami of vulnerabilities that's coming? Because you're right. Anthropic's CEO is saying all this. And while I would love to disagree with him, he's right. If Anthropic sits on this, there's about 4 other models that are going to be dropped from China in the next 30 days that'll allow you to do the exact same thing that Mythos is doing. It's coming. And we have to be ready for it. And there's going to be some people that get on board and they get to working with us and working with your MSSP if you're listening to this. And there's going to be people that don't want to pay for it. Andrew, who was the person that talked about the shared responsibility matrix so much when we were doing the CIS class, Ask Me Anything session?
Oh, Eric Woodard.
Yeah, Eric Woodard talked about the shared responsibility matrix. You need to look at what your contracts cover and what your contracts don't cover. And you need to have those conversations with your customers and that shared responsibility matrix saying, I can protect these, I can't protect these areas. These areas over here are going to cost more money. We have to be open and have those conversations right now.
Yeah, it's leadership, right, at the end of the day, and education and helping our clients understand what the business impact is. Because I hear the same thing, John. It's like, we don't want to spend $1 more than we have to on security compliance. And but here's the trade-offs for that, right?
So Brian, did you have anything else, Brian?
No.
All right. Well, we made it under John just in time. I know you got another meeting coming up here. Any closing thoughts you wanted to leave us with, John?
Chaos is a ladder. Climb it.
Yeah.
We all love technology. Everyone that's listening to the show loves technology. Be that person that loves technology. Be that person that's embracing the change. Don't be the person wandering the hillsides with bricks and hammers to destroy looms. Don't be a Luddite. Embrace the change. Chaos is a ladder. It's gonna be a hell of a ride, but you wouldn't be in this industry if you thought it was boring anyway.
I think it's really sound advice as we close up here, John. Again, every whether it was RMM to cloud to cyber to automation to now AI, the MSPs that embraced the uncertainty kind of got out there and really changed their models, right? Mm-hmm. To embrace what was happening, really became the leaders, and I think this is going to be another huge opportunity for us all. So really appreciate you all coming on. John, thanks a million for today. Chip, thanks for filling in and coming on and co-hosting. Brian, the same. Kelvin, wonderful to see you, and again, congrats on another great release. Be safe out there. We'll look forward to seeing you all next week. Take care.
If you're in the Write a Boom community but not in our Discord yet, you're missing where the real conversation happens. Join community.writeaboom.com to access cybercall discussions, upcoming CTFs, boom camps, and early access to what's coming next. If you want to stay close to what's actually happening in the MSP security space, I'll see you there.